Hello, welcome to this week's Liverpool.com podcast. I am Dan Morgan. I'm joined by Ollie Connelly, Joe Rabinowitz, Liverpool.com staff writers, and making his Liverpool.com podcast debut, David Lynch. Gents, hope you're all well. A nice one for you to come into, Dave, after Liverpool went to Arsenal and won 3-0 at his round victory at the Emirates Stadium. I want to go round and offer you the chance to answer this question with one word. And Oliver Connelly, I'll start with you. Do Liverpool go on to beat Arsenal on Saturday if Diogo Jota isn't available to come on from the bench?
Yes.
Joel?
No.
Dave?
No.
Ollie?
You've got to defend that now, Ollie.
Yeah, that front three line has scored hundreds and hundreds of goals for the club. You know, I think that they were so in control. And I know your point, Dan, is that still there's something not quite right. There's a fluidity lacking, and when Jota comes on, he brings such an incisiveness, such directness, such energy. It is everything that they're lacking. I do feel like that Arsenal team is so poor, and they were so in control that even just a corner and it goes off someone's head, I feel like they would have found a way to break through, or a penalty or something. It just might not have looked quite as incisive and as obviously emphatic as it wound up looking at the end with Jota coming on.
Dave, there is still a lingering front three question here, isn't there? Ollie's words around fluidity are the right words to use. But to me, it's the casualness and it's the wastefulness that's still there. And I'm not sure whether you can pinpoint it now on one particular thing, or you can say that it's, young enough to still call a blip. It does feel like maybe, and I'll back these forwards to the hilt for what they've done for this club, but the first time it just does feel like to me that it might need breaking up in some form going into next season.
Yeah, it's sort of hard to judge, I think, what, we're saying there about whether they would have won the game or not if they hadn't had Jota, and he just looks in a different place to so many other members of that front three. So particularly, obviously, Firmino and Mane, the ones whose form he really sort of concerned about. Obviously, Salah has kept up his goal scoring this season, been absolutely fine and playing really well. But it's the other two, isn't it, that you have concerns about, and it is just that little lack of fluidity, that sort of final moment in front of goal, just not looking as convincing as he usually would. And Jota, you wonder whether it's because he's played less football this season, he's less jaded maybe than they are, because he's had that time off through injury, and that's helped him to just, he's infinitely more ruthless than Mane and Firmino, isn't he, in front of goal this season. So I think if there is a long-term conversation about, well, it exists to break up that front three, then, Jota is banging on the door, isn't he, to take one of those places, because he could not be doing more than he is at the moment. His goal rate this season's outrageous. I think he's averaging a goal every 120 minutes in the Premier League and Champions League so far. And yeah, he just looks like another world-class option they've got there. So I think, if you're Firmino or Mane, you're certainly looking over your shoulder, because the fella behind them is ready to take their place now.
Is it as simple, Joel, as Liverpool need just some more options? And anyone could have argued back to me the point that, yeah, they might not have won the game if they didn't have him on the bench, but they did, and they went on to win the game, and that is just the cold hard fact. And is it, Ferguson was always great at selling a player when he felt he needed to, and it was the right thing for the squad. You think about Beckham, Van Nistelrooy, even Cristiano to an extent, but there's no real screaming need for me for Liverpool to get rid of Salah, for example, to get rid of any of them. I think it just looks to me like they need more options for different game states going into the next campaign.
Yeah, I agree. I think that they obviously identified this last summer as something that needed to be addressed, even after a season or two seasons in which they did, 196 points across those two with the standard front three. They kind of saw that there was an obvious need to add another one who was younger and hungry and could make that step up like they have. And kind of to lose him for 3 months, that he was the problem solver in games like that Arsenal one. There were countless examples while he was out. Games like West Brom at home come to mind, Newcastle away, United at home. Games like Ollie's talking there, Liverpool looked in kind of complete control in most of those games, and you think the goal is going to come, but there is a lack of cutting edge, I suppose, with those. And there was an example, I think, in the first half against Arsenal where Mane, I think he did a brilliant kind of turn, ran away from 2 or 3 players, surged into the box, and all he needed to do was keep on going, and he would have had a clear shot on goal. But instead, he kind of pauses, takes an extra touch, tries to lay it off to Firmino, and it ends up just sort of petering out into nothing. And I mean, that was a really clear example of kind of where last season Mane probably just goes for goal there and scores himself. But I think what's been interesting seeing Jota come back into the team after this 3 months out is he's not carrying any of that burden. I think some of these players, even though the results have picked up Liverpool recently, it psychologically would have been really tough what they've been through since Christmas. And Jota, because he's been out of the picture, hasn't had to kind of wade through all that. So he's just kind of come in. There's no weight on his shoulders at all. And yeah, like Ollie says, he offers something completely different. It's difficult to kind of pinpoint a specific skill that he's kind of necessarily better at than any of the front 3, because he's not, I wouldn't say he's definitely not quicker than Mane or Salah, and his finishing, it's the variety of his finishing, I think. I mean, I wrote a piece this week looking at his headers, which is something that I thought when they bought him, you expected him to score the kind of the tap-in poacher finishes that he was scoring at Wolves, but the fact he's now got 4 headers in his last 5 goals for Liverpool and Portugal now, he's just such a diverse threat, I think. So I think going into next summer, I'd seen a lot of people saying that we need to go for an out-and-out number 9, a centre forward. I'd quite like to see another sort of Jota-style player who can pretty much play across the forward line. I've spoken repeatedly about Neto at Wolves, who might seem a bit samey because he is kind of quite close to Jota in terms of play style. But I think if they can get another one in that sort of 21 to 24 age bracket who can play left, right, or through the middle, I mean, that's probably what I would look to do.
The one thing I would say on that, though, is you go through Premier League history, it's hard to find a front 3 where they all kind of have similar physical profiles and similar kind of, a lot of our stuff is speed and direct, and all of Liverpool's build-up play in the Klopp era has been isolate the 2 wide guys. It's very efficient. They don't touch the ball a lot when you end up with the end-of-season numbers, and they're hyper-efficient when they get the ball. If you have 3 of them, it sounds really fun in theory. I think over the course of a season, that kind of 3 and they row and they move positions is kind of what you get in your mind. But you go through all the great trios, even Tevez, Rooney, Ronaldo, one of them is a drop-off and create player. Same with Neymar, Messi, Suarez. Suarez and Messi both drop off and can drop and create. And Salah did that at Roma. He was kind of a drifting off the wing playmaker than he was what he wound up being at Liverpool. So maybe you could get that from him. But you go through all of them and usually you have one either battering ram or a drop guy. And then you get the 2 flyers who go in behind. I think it would be hard to run a full season with 3 diminutive, speedy forwards, and that's your style. You've got a ton of creative burden on fullbacks and your midfield there, and I think that's a lot to ask.
I think that's interesting because when they've occasionally tried that, and maybe Firmino's the one who's probably most under pressure for his plays, and when they've tried that and they've gone with Jota in that position and dropped Firmino out of there, I think ball retention has been a real issue for Liverpool as well, because you've got 3 players who want to go in behind constantly, rather than none of them naturally really want to come deep that often. And that causes issues in build-up, and I think we've seen that in games. It's not happened very frequently, but we've seen it in games. I think one of the Leipzig games was when he started with that front 3, and I thought keeping the ball was an issue for Liverpool. So that's an interesting point, because that's a quandary they're going to have to solve if they do bring in an additional attacker. It's got to be someone who brings a bit of what Firmino does to the table, I think.
Do you think, Dave, there's a chance of them looking at what they can take from this season into next with Jota and his development, and saying, look, there's possibility we just have to, especially against sort of the bottom 10 to 14 of the league, we just sort of Man City 4-2-4 this, and it look on paper some variants of a 4-2-3-1, but it's that sort of City pinning you in, controlling you, and having 4 forwards in theory on the pitch who will smother you and will ensure that you're not going to get your Burnley and Brighton home results that you've seen this season through the frustration that they've been able to cause.
I don't know. I think Klopp might be reluctant to use that too frequently, just because I think when you did see it against Manchester City, I thought he was forced into that, really, wasn't he? Because of Jota's form was so good at the time, and the fact that he didn't really have any midfielders he could name, so it was forced upon him. And I think an issue they had in that game was actually they struggled to sort of get Jota into the positions he usually would be in when he's part of the front 3, those goal scoring positions, because there was 4 of them, and they were almost, at times it was making the same runs and getting in each other's way, and it didn't completely click in the way that I think that Klopp would have hoped. So I don't know if in the long term, whether that's something he's going to look to want to do. And I think his main thing about, those games where they've dropped points is maybe not that they've not had enough attackers on the pitch. It's maybe that some elements of the control of the game haven't been right in midfield and protection of the defence, and those moments where they've been exploited, I think, and creativity hasn't been there. And I think just sticking the forwards on the pitch is not really something I think he's going to want to do in the long term, which makes this whole thing that we're talking about the long-term future of the front three and changing that and how it looks over time. It makes it difficult for the manager because, if they do bring in an extra forward option because they're in Europe next season, then he's, those difficult decisions that he's largely avoided this season because of Jota being out for such a long time, he's going to have to make those nearly every week. And that's going to be difficult to move on from that front three who've done so much for him and been so good, and he's trusted them for so long. You wouldn't like to be the manager having that conversation every week that Firmino's dropped or Mane misses this game or Salah. It's a difficult one for managers.
Just to add on that one, I think there's a couple of other examples as well earlier in the season when he tried a sort of 4-2-4, 4-2-3. One was it Sheffield United and maybe West Ham at home when he did it, and he played Jota with the front three. And I think it is one of those, it sounds better and more exciting on paper than it actually ends up being in reality, because like you said, they are all fairly similar. I think where it is really useful and where I think is changing against Arsenal was really effective against tired legs. I think that can be a real solution for Liverpool on the sort of 55, 60-minute mark if they haven't kind of found a breakthrough and need to kind of go up a gear. I think bringing one of them, whoever it is, off the bench to make it a front four during a game in the second half is something we could see quite a lot more of going forward, and something Liverpool have missed the option of doing over the last few months. But I think I probably agree with Dave there. On a long-term basis, I struggle to see him sort of veering too far away from a three-man attack. And I think, that'll be kind of the main thing next season is having the option to change it during a game, more so than kind of reverting to that as a standard thing.
Ollie, is there a possibility we all end up, by we all, I mean me, looking foolish with statements like this in light of something really simple happening, like Sadio Mane getting a bit of form back? I mean, Salah is weirdly his own thing through all of this. Like, he can be any type of forward you want him to be at any one time, and he still delivers numbers. Firmino's evolution means his identity is changing constantly. But I think you've got a real argument. This is probably Mane's toughest spell of form since that first half of 2017-18 when he gets sent off against City, and he goes on a real sort of bad spell. There's that really bad miss against Everton, I remember, in the derby, and then he gets his form back around New Year when he scores against Burnley away on New Year's Day. And if Sadio Mane sort of decides that he's going to be his 2019-20 incumbent for the next 15 months, are we all sort of saying what we're worried about?
Yeah, possibly. What's interesting over the last couple of months, I was talking about this with the two of you on the call this morning, that they've become a lot more match-to-match oriented in changing the mechanics of the build-up play in a way they've never done before. So you get the stretch, you mentioned the 4-2-4 there, nothing like really they've ever done before. The mechanics were a bit all over the place. You end up at West Brom at home, they played 1-to-1 across the board. They would just line up with 6 people. Everyone stood man-to-man across the board. It didn't work. Then they go to that 3-2-5 we discussed a ton at Sheffield United, Chelsea. Then at Arsenal, they build up in a 3-3-4, different than anything they've done essentially for the past 2 months. Firmino's playing as a centre midfielder for a ton of that build-up. I think he wants to, Klopp, become more of someone in that Guardiola vein. We see them, they build up with 3-1-6 almost all the time now. They change who the wide players are essentially on a match-to-match basis. I think he wants to be a manager who can go into every game with a different plan if need be, and just get him as many different skill sets. So he has a Mane, he has a Jota, he has a Firmino. And if that means Firmino is one day lining up as essentially an inside left number 10, but he writes him down on the team sheet as a striker, and we say it's a 4-3-3. I think he's cool with that. I don't think they're as good as they think they are at doing that. I think you made a good point today. They kind of are better when it's a 5-match plan, often because of suspension or injury. And it's like, okay, we'll just run a 4-2-3-1 now with Shaqiri playing on the right side. I think when they know what they're doing and they can just rep it and it's just match, they're so much better than when him and Pep Linders get in a room and they try and identify single one-game plans and try and get a bit funky and creative frustrated with some of the build-up. So I think they've been overthinking a lot of stuff this season. And if next season it turns out that Sadio Mane is just Sadio Mane again, and he's world-class and he's flying off the left, and him and Robertson are just flying together, it will all just sort itself out. If that left side combination clicks and Trent is Trent because he's had a rest, and same with Mo Salah, I think it will all just slot together and we'll be fine. And it will be really simplistic, and it will just be Jota or Firmino coming off the bench at some point.
Just on Jota, Dave, I mean, I think he's not getting the credit he perhaps deserves, in the sense that I'm not sure this is all sort of by accident. I think he's clearly seen an opportunity for him to create his own identity at Liverpool through what he might perceive that they've been lacking. And there's a real certainty about him between the posts, I'd say, in a way that, I mean, he's not putting everything top corner out of reach of goalkeepers, but everything he does is precise, it's targeted, it's clean, and he's sort of, well, he has completely remolded his whole identity as a forward. And like I said, I'm starting to think now that maybe with a little bit of coaching and a bit of encouragement from the likes of Klopp and Linders, that, you know, this sort of version of Diogo Jota that nobody really seen at Wolves was something that Liverpool have in some ways created and harnessed.
Yeah, that it's about his efficiency in the box, isn't it? He's just, you know, he's absolutely capable of getting himself into goal scoring positions and then making clean contact with the ball, and he's just utterly ruthless when he gets in those positions. It's he's been a revelation, and I think, you know, if he'd been fit the whole season, any debate about the best signing of the season, he would have it wrapped up by now, because he's, you know, the rate he's scoring goals, it doesn't, you know, there hasn't even been a drop off since he came back in from that injury. So he's an absolutely phenomenal player, and he's the next step, isn't he, for this front three? It's, you know, we're all saying about this debate about who drops out, and that's a difficult one to sort of square at the moment, but it has to happen because Jota is ready to take that mantle. He's at the level that these forward players we've seen for so long, he's at that level now in terms of his goal scoring contribution. So it's it's an interesting one, another sort of, you know, huge tick in the box for Michael Edwards and their ability to scout players and see that there's sort of some level of undervaluation on them as well. Because I think, you know, Jota's price at the time, everyone sort of went, 40 million, that's quite expensive for a player from Wolves. I already think we're in a position where that looks like a bargain, just for what he can give Liverpool in the long term, his age profile, the fact he's scoring goals at the rate he is now. You know, you extrapolate that over the next 5 years of his contract, and he'll prove a snip, won't he? So it's, just an incredible footballer, brilliant player. It's been just a joy to watch, and I think between now and the end of the season, really interesting to see, you know, who he displaces, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. I mean, Ollie, you're writing a piece today on the difference between Jota and Timo Werner, and a lot of the sort of narratives around that. I mean, it is encouraging still, despite what happens with Liverpool this season, even if they don't make Champions League, that you do have that body of evidence there of a player who has been picked up, who no one really, you know, has any sort of identity in terms of, oh, let's go and get him in the summer. And completely, you know, just seeing him thrive and seeing him just how much he enjoys it as well. He's absolutely loving life at Liverpool.
Yeah, why wouldn't he? He's scoring goals every time he steps onto the pitch. It must be really fun. Getting world-class delivery from all over the gaff. It's got to be a great time. And you've got to think at Wolves, I remember when we signed him, we spoke about it. They had what you would call a pressing system in like posh new parlance, which is basically, Diogo, you go and run around a lot and we'll all stand back here. So to move from that kind of system to what he's doing now, where it's like, wait, I get to touch the ball 20 times a game and almost all of them are in the box. This is amazing. It has to be a blast. That deal they signed this summer, I was going through the numbers today. Given that they did it all in installments, they got a deal that was basically, we'll do a flat installment payment rather than the traditional model now, which is you pay a lump up front and then you install, you know, the last bits out. It's every year we'll get the same cash amount, you know, on the 1st of July or whatever. That plus wages is basically £15 million a year for Diogo Jota. £50 million, which they could probably get for Divock Origi in the summer if they wanted to, from a Bundesliga team. So it is just an unbelievable bargain. It's half the wages of Timo Werner, and you can go back and forth on would he be a different player playing for Jurgen Klopp? Is it a mental thing versus a talent thing? It's undeniably one of the finest deals of the Michael Edwards era to me already. I know that Robertson and that's like almost a different level of bargain, and Mohamed Salah is one of the finest players ever played in the Premier League at that value too. But the way he built that deal under that climate, when he had almost no bargaining chips, and he's being told you've got no money, but if you want to try and make a deal that looks like £50 million in the press, but is really just £15 million, go and do it. And so with that budget, he found this little delightful player who will go on and play for them now, probably for 6, 7, 8 years at this level. It's as good as he's ever done.
Yeah, I mean, Joel, you touched on Neto before as a possibility of who they might add. I mean, we've got to look at Harvey Elliott as well, right? We've got to assume that there's real plans for him next season too.
I would think so, yeah. Not necessarily as someone who will come in and start a whole load of games, although I do think in the domestic cups he's probably a player to try and definitely use from the start. I think where I could see Elliott coming in real handy next season is kind of, if we're presuming that Shaqiri and Origi move on, as long as there are actually clubs willing to buy them this summer. I think you could see Elliott sort of taking the role that Shaqiri has played a few times this season, where he's coming off the bench around the 70-minute mark when the game's level or Liverpool need a goal, because he's kind of got quite a lot of similar skill sets, I think, to Shaqiri. I think he's a little bit quicker, but in terms of that left-footed player coming from the right-hand side and playing that sort of diagonal ball in behind, I can really imagine him sort of making a real impact next season. And I think the thing as well, you saw it last season in the games that he did have in the kind of the cups and stuff, is game maturity in general, is kind of ball retention. He's not just trying silly things and showboating here and there. He's a really smart player for his age, and I think I'm right in saying he's not even turned 18 yet, which, and given you look at his numbers in the Championship this season, I think he's, if not top, he's near the top of the assist table. He's in double figures for assists for Blackburn. Is unbelievable, really. So I think at the moment, I would almost quite like to see him, at least for the first half of the season, whilst Liverpool are in the League Cup and the FA Cup, keep him there rather than send him straight back on loan again. Just see what you can get out of him, because you never know. You could get to sort of December time and the games are coming thick and fast, and a player like Elliott could be really useful, and he's going to be one who's going to be desperate to come back and make a big impression over the summer. So yeah, I agree. I think he's one that we shouldn't really sort of discount in the whole conversation around the front three. I'm not quite convinced yet. I haven't seen enough of him, obviously, at Liverpool to kind of definitively say what his long-term position is yet. He doesn't seem to have a huge amount of pace running in behind quite as much. He seems more a player who's going to kind of pick up his positions between the midfield and attack, more like a sort of number 10 or attacking midfielder, which how that plays into Liverpool's 4-3-3. I'm not entirely sure whether he'll be kind of a long-term front three option or kind of over time, whether we see him sort of gradually move slightly deeper. That'll be an interesting one to keep an eye out. But yeah, massively exciting, and I think we've got a lot to look forward to with him next season.
Do you think that Phil Foden changes that calculus any, Dan? I know that City's squad was different, and they had Sane and the Silvers, and it was like world-class talent keeping him out, but he was kept quite a lot longer back from the public view. He had this reputation at 17 of being the best 17-year-old in the world, and we just never got to see him unless he was playing for England. And they really waited until they're like, this lad's actually world-class now, and so we'll play him now. Again, I know it's different for them in terms of squad depth, but you think that that kind of could become the formula now, where it's like, why are we giving this lad 400 minutes off a bench a season? Let's just keep him away from the public. Let's go and send him back to Blackburn. Let's send him to Swansea. Let's do whatever. Keep him away from people. And when we think he's really ready to make an impact on the first team, then we bring him in. And this kind of the old school style of you drip feed them games and they kind of slowly work their way into the first team. Do you think that could change at all with someone as special as Elliott?
I'm not sure, and I think it comes back to the moving variables. I'd say, you know, if suddenly Salah decides he wants to leave in the summer and there's someone there to buy him, then you're having a completely different conversation. But the flip side of that is also if there's someone like a Neto who represents the same value as a Jota, then is that too good a deal to turn down as sort of a one-off? I think, I mean, Dave, you'll know more about this than me with how they look at Elliott, but I think they really, really think he can be something, and I think they'll be more certain of themselves with how they've developed someone like Curtis too, to say that in this environment we know this player can be right, and if it's the fact that he's just 18 or what, it doesn't matter. I mean, Dave, what do you think they'll do? I mean, they do seem to really like him, don't they?
Yeah, well, the plan, and I think this is a lot, is the plan wasn't to loan him out this season at all. That was very much a last minute decision. I mean, you obviously can read into the fact that he only goes on deadline day anyway. But the fact that, they very much expected that Shaqiri would eventually leave at some point this summer. As we know, he's spoken about it publicly, that he had a few offers, but sort of decided he thought he would be better served staying at Liverpool. And if Shaqiri had moved on, I think, you would have seen Elliott picking up those minutes that Shaqiri's had this season. I think the idea is that spot is probably going to open up this summer. I think, we know fans are coming back, so football clubs are going to have a little bit more cash this summer, or they can expect it to come in. So I think, this is the summer where Shaqiri moves on, and I think that opens up that spot nicely for Elliott. I think they believe that he could basically take on that supporting role. And, that was the plan for Curtis Jones, for example, to take Adam Lallana's minutes this season. Obviously, he's ended up doing quite a lot more because of the injuries, but, that is what the plan was for him. So I think that's how it's going to work. I think you'll see Shaqiri move on this summer, and I think that spot is then ready for Elliott. And it's not going to be regular first team minutes, is it? We don't see Shaqiri that often, aside from when there's serious injuries. But I think that'll be the way they want to play it, is to sort of give him the League Cup guaranteed, FA Cup guaranteed, and then see what else he can pick up in the Premier League. And I think Jurgen Klopp's minded. I see what Ollie's saying about Foden, and it was sort of strange to see how long it took him to break in at City. And sometimes it made me almost doubt whether is all the hype deserved. It's taken him so long to get in at City, but I think Klopp, the way he wants to treat Elliott, is he would prefer to have him close and have him around in training as much as possible, and then, like I say, just give him those minutes in the cups and see what else he can build on from there. But yeah, there's absolutely no doubt at Liverpool that they think they've got a special talent on hands in Harvey Elliott, and it's quite exciting really for next season to see a bit more of him at Anfield.
There is a piece on thepool.com which I predict he will blow the Premier League by storm and be the next revelation, which I am probably wrong in, as I am with everything. So do head over and read that, because there's no more incentive there than that plug from me. One man who doesn't know his way around a 4-2-4, Ollie, is clearly Mikel Arteta. He got that one wrong, didn't he, just a bit on Saturday?
They're awful, aren't they? They're all. I don't even understand what they're trying to be.
Could you understand what he was trying to do? I can. You can understand with the Pepe sort of stretching it right side. I think his problem is he doesn't have a Smith Rowe or Saka on the left, and he has to go with Aubameyang.
I think their big problem is how reliant they are on David Luiz, Xhaka, Smith Rowe, and Saka, and two of them are wholly unreliable and borderline awful, and the other two are teenagers and young lads. And this is Arsenal Football Club, and it's not like they've been penny pinching for the last decade. There's some serious wages in the squad. There's some serious money to be spent in the transfer window, and you really felt like Mikel Arteta would at least come with a coherent doctrine, some kind of sense of how he wanted the team to look, and you would be able to just kind of map out in your head. We all thought it was just going to be Pep Guardiola rocks up. Might not be as good, but they'll have a coherent way of playing. And this dig in, defend, and will be really dogged in defense, and like you say, stretch the play on one side. I thought that was like a 5-6 game thing at the back end of last season just to get over the line. For it to continue like this and then be that awful for this long it's just confusing.
Does it offer us, Joel, more evidence that this league is in a continuing sort of state of flux? We still talk about the top six as a concept, but I mean, we're talking about them in all but reputation now in terms of what we're putting out in certain teams. And Arsenal, one who you look at and you think, well, you could make really good arguments for the likes of Leicester, maybe even Everton as being teams who are an upward trajectory, you can argue, and they look a lot further ahead than Arsenal, some of them.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the poorest Arsenal side I've seen in my lifetime, really, probably of the Premier League era, to be honest. It just offered absolutely nothing, like Ollie said. From the first whistle, I don't think there's been a Liverpool game this season where I've been less stressed watching it. They just never, apart from the fact that it obviously took a while to get the breakthrough, they just offered nothing going forward, and obviously are kind of quite flawed at the back as well. But I think if you to kind of look ahead to next season now and try and predict how the kind of the top six of the European places look, I'm no way I'm putting Arsenal in there, even if they go ahead and have quite a decent summer transfer window. I just think others have kind of come to the fore. I don't think there's any reason really why Leicester should fall off. They've got players there who are kind of in that similar age bracket to the ones Liverpool have had huge amount of success in. I think the likes of Maddison, Barnes and DD, they're all sort of early mid-20s who are probably still got their peak years kind of to come really in 2 or 3 seasons time. So I think Leicester are one that I just kind of see being in and around. I'm not saying they'll definitely be Champions League kind of the next 4 or 5 seasons, but they'll be in the mix, I think. West Ham, again, I'd kind of go back to it, was in our pre-season predictions. I did actually say they might have a decent season. They're one that I can see hanging around, and Everton too. So I think in terms of the big six being a traditional kind of structure going forward, I struggle to see it. Tottenham as well are just another one that I know they're level on points now. I think Liverpool just ahead on goal difference. But they're one that I wouldn't be surprised at all if Mourinho's gone in the summer, especially if they've kind of finished trophyless again. They're in a massive state of flux because I think Kane, he's coming up to 27, 28 now, and he's breaking all these goal records. He could quite feasibly, I think, go on and overtake Shearer by the end of his career as the all-time Premier League top scorer. For him to kind of be coming into what are potentially kind of the 3 peak years of his career and still have absolutely nothing in the cabinet to show for it, wouldn't be that surprised if kind of they get a big offer knocking this summer. And I think for the first time, it's not that beyond realms of possibility that he might want to look elsewhere. And then you obviously got the likes of Son, similar sort of situation. I think Spurs are one that have obviously been such a kind of prominent part of that big six or top 4 picture now for so many seasons. I think they're one that are in a real kind of uncertain situation going forward. So yeah, I agree. As for kind of the big six as we know it, I think the next few seasons and this one, obviously, that's not going to be the case going forward.
There's a real problem, Dave, isn't there, with the sort of buying pool that Arsenal and Tottenham are in? You know, you couldn't envisage now that Arsenal could go and get a Mesut Ozil when he was at Real Madrid, for example. And I think Liverpool suffered with this, you know, around the Rodgers years, in that there was a clear sort of knowing your place in the food chain, and Liverpool's was one which very quickly became they could have the best players taken from them, and the players they could buy were to some degree a risk. And the more this sort of stagnates with both of those London sides, the more you can see that their options to go and sort of shop at the highest market they're just going to be limited and dissipated.
Yeah, that's it, and that's their route out of this, is to buy better players, isn't it? And I think you really struggle to see how they managed to do that, because, you know, like you say, with Liverpool's position when they were under Rodgers, it was okay. A player says to his agent that he wants to go and play in the Premier League, and that he'd be open to any offers from there. And you start looking at the clubs he might want to go to, and, you know, you'd be looking at Manchester City, Manchester United, Chelsea, all the teams that were above Liverpool at the time, and they were supposed to have to try and crack into the top 4. Tottenham were flying at that point, and Arsenal are even further down that list now. I would argue that, you know, even Leicester might be a more appealing project, considering what they've done for players at the moment. They look like a really good stepping stone club, don't they? And they really developed some nice talent there. So it's difficult for Arsenal to see how they get around that. I think the way Liverpool got over that was by appointing a world-class manager, a huge name, who was going to attract talent to the club. And, you know, Arsenal haven't got that at the moment. I don't think there's players really chomping at the bit to play under Mikel Arteta at the moment. Particularly the style of football doesn't seem to be a real identity there either, or, you know, a real project that you think you could buy into as a player. So yeah, it's really difficult to see how they sort of recover from that. And you know, I think it's maybe a difficult summer ahead for them, because they've got some big decisions to make, I think, in terms of the composition of that squad. But I don't think they really are an attractive destination at the moment. So it's they're in a really difficult position.
Well, Ollie, we're looking ahead to Liverpool travelling to Madrid tomorrow to take on Real Madrid in the quarterfinal of the Champions League. It's a huge game, as we know. It's one in which everyone's sort of been looking forward to since the draw was made. I mean, Zinedine Zidane's been speaking before the game. He's talked about Madrid's sort of place in the pecking order, their injury updates, etc. Liverpool have got to go there with nothing to fear, right? Even, you know, a sort of a ghoul of Eden Hazard of years gone by isn't going to scare them going into this one.
No, you got to remember as well, Madrid have the Clásico at the weekend, and Zidane has to know he does not have the horses for a European Cup battle this year. I know that it's synonymous with the club. They care about it infinitely more than the league title even, but they're right there in the league in a year where they've just been decimated by COVID and injuries and all kind of nonsense, frankly, has gone on for Madrid this year. It's just been a mess. So to find themselves with a real shot at winning the league title after all that, I think that they will have their eyes fully on that. And he has to know, even against Liverpool, if Liverpool's in free-flowing great form and Arsenal's about as good as you can hope for going into that, he doesn't have the horses to run with that. He certainly doesn't have it for Bayern or City later on in the competition. The team is just old, it's slow, and there is talent there. Don't get me wrong. You've got Odriozola coming back through. They obviously have Vinicius, who is probably the game changer that could do something magical for you. Benzema's still in unbelievable form. The midfield trio is still excellent, and they can still dictate the flow of any game in Europe. And they kind of hope that they can maybe, keep the rhythm flowing and then rip you open 3 or 4 times during a game and really be clinical and make it count. That's the formula there. And you could see them doing it just on nous and guile and understanding and all that type of stuff. And maybe they nick a goal in the first leg and shut down shop in the second one. But it's not in any way an imposing Real Madrid side. You're going to, a training ground essentially rather than the Bernabeu. It's just the vibe and aura of Real Madrid is not there with this team. It's a completely different team. You take the names off the shirts and it's just a bang average team you're playing in Europe. And I think Liverpool should be really confident going into it.
Joel, I mean, what will serve Liverpool well in this game is the recent manner in which they've adopted patience to win games. You think of both Leipzig games, they didn't panic. They hung on over the both games, using both legs to ensure they could win the game later. But then you've also, you've got Arsenal, which we spoke about. We've got Wolves before that. This is a team now not conceding goals, which, is a massive benefit and a massive positive going into a game like this. And I'm sure they'll bide the time with this one if they need to.
I think so, yeah. I think the whole kind of moving Fabinho back into the midfield really has changed everything for Liverpool over his last 3 games. I think as much as Kabak and Phillips deserve a huge amount of credit for how well they've done, I think it's no coincidence that they kept 3 consecutive clean sheets now with Fabinho there, because the knock-on for the rest of the team is enormous. It helps the full-backs, it helps the centre-backs. I think it helps the front 3 in terms of sustaining pressure and pinning teams back. And also Thiago. I think that those two, Fabinho and Thiago together, you can really pretty much pick anyone, I think, to go with them. I think we all expect, given he was rested against Arsenal, Wijnaldum will come back in there. And the amount of kind of experience, and now so you've got the balance of defensive and offensive attributes between those 3, Fabinho, Wijnaldum, Thiago, is kind of ideal really for a European tie like this. And I agree in terms of the patience thing. Looking at Real Madrid's likely starting 11, I know there's a few kind of debatable ones there, but a lot of their key players really are kind of getting on now. I think Modric is 35. Benzema's had a really good season in front of goal, but he's 33. Marcelo still getting games. He's 32. There's a lot of players there who you can see struggling to live with Liverpool's pace and intensity. If the game sort of gets to around the 65, 70-minute mark and it's still tight, you can imagine Liverpool are hanging in there. They'll be the strongest team towards the end of the game. So having a look as well beforehand at Real Madrid's kind of scorers this season and where their actual threat is. And it's staggering, really. I think you've got Benzema is on 25 goals in all competitions. And then the next top scorer is on 6. And that's Asensio, who's hardly a kind of prolific player. And then I think after that, it's Ramos, who's on 4. He's obviously going to miss the game for injury. Modric has got a few. Even players like Vinicius, that Ollie's mentioned there, obviously talented, quick and skillful and can be dangerous. But I think they've only scored 2 or 3 this season. It really is all about Benzema, and there's just not a lot else coming from anywhere else. And I know you could have made an argument for Liverpool that it's kind of Salah or nothing in recent months, but now that Jota's back, that's very much not the case. You can see Liverpool kind of getting goals there, and I think that's the thing, that there isn't, you don't look at it and think there's a huge amount to fear. I know we mentioned this morning there's the kind of the Eden Hazard question. I think he might be available now. I think he's been training for them. He's had a huge amount of injury problems, obviously, but he's not been performing consistently at a high level because he's not been on the pitch really for coming on 2 years now. And again, he's kind of scored 2 or 3 goals this season, but compared to the last time Liverpool played Real Madrid, where you're looking across and there's 3-4 players there who you think can really hurt you, it's not the case now. It's essentially a 33-year-old Benzema who who will score if he gets chances. But if you can keep him quiet, other than that, they are kind of relatively blunt as a team.
The timing here is everything. As we're recording, they said Hazard isn't in the squad, so that he's not going to travel.
Okay,
or he's just not in the squad. They don't score goals from open play. I think they've scored one more than Liverpool this season in open play, obviously a different league. And same as with Liverpool, you can argue fractured squad. You know, everyone's coming and going, COVID injuries, exact same setup. It's the exact same stodgy look that Liverpool fans had to deal with. Watch that Madrid team. But Liverpool now have some degree of consistency, some degree of continuity. They know what it's going to look like. They have options going in. Do we play Firmino? Do we play Jota? What a wonderful decision to be able to make. Zidane is looking around going, my team can't score goals except for from corners, and I don't know what lineup to put out there. It's a completely different thing. So it's just a timing situation for me. Liverpool are in better form. It makes more sense on paper in that Real Madrid team. It is not fearful in any way.
Dave, I mean, we've got to expect when Alton comes back in for Milner. There was never a more pre-planned sub than the Robertson one on Saturday. I guess to sort of end where we started, really. I mean, the question in many senses around Liverpool comes back to Jota. Do they keep him on the bench and go with the front three? Use that element of patience, or do they decide he has to play?
I think he's got to play, hasn't he? Yeah, it's such a tough one, this, because I think he's got to play, and I think, like we've said, the one in the front three who's arguably under the most threat from Jota would typically be Firmino in terms of his form this season. But I think you can't leave Firmino out of the big game like this. You just can't, in terms of what he does in occupying centre backs, closing off spaces, shutting down passing lanes. He's the best of the front three at doing that sort of stuff and the real dirty work. So you can't think about playing Real Madrid away and not putting Firmino in that team. So then, you know, do you leave Sadio Mane on the bench? You know, and his form, you could probably justify it, but it seems like a crazy thing to do given what we know he's achieved over recent years. I'm so glad I'm not a manager. Basically, I think it's a really tough one. I think maybe go with start Jota and maybe leave Mane on the bench, but that seems madness now, just saying that out loud. But I've said it's done.
I was going to say, I think we might be able to kind of have a conversation for Firmino about the fact that he's only just come back from an injury and he's trying to manage his game time. So if he says to him that started the Arsenal game, bench you here, maybe come on 65, 70 if we need you, but he starts Villa at the weekend, I think you can make a sort of managing his game time a fitness argument around Firmino just purely off the back of his injury. I think he only came back into full training kind of sometime into that break that Liverpool had, so it wasn't like he was having 3 weeks at Kirby. He's only been in, I think, for sort of 10 days or so now. So I think you might just say, yeah, start the league games and we'll use him off the bench. And I think, to be honest, that's a great option. There's been kind of several games in the past where Firmino's come on. There was a few, I think, at kind of the start of last season. I remember the Super Cup actually against Chelsea where Firmino doesn't start as a big game and then he comes on, scores, sets up the other one. I think he can be a bit of an underrated aspect of Firmino. I think he is quite effective as a sub if Liverpool need him. So I think that's probably what I'd be doing and go with Jota from the start. To
be fair, it's probably an underrated aspect just on the element that it rarely happens, though. That's what it's interesting about, is that, you know, will Klopp surely, can he resist the temptation to lean on Firmino in a big game because he's so important and has been so integral in those big performances in recent years. That's what, you know, I think that's what makes it tough, isn't it? That's why managers get paid what they do.
One word. Go on, Ollie.
He's got to be really thinking about playing all four in this one. I know it would be a massive gamble. I know their midfield three is the best part of their team and they can dominate a game against anyone, basically. But they have got no Carvajal, no Ramos. They are reeling. And Zidane, who is already talking about how he fancies extra time in the second leg, by the way, is really saying, let's just survive this one and make the next one a cup final and hope for the best and see who's available then. If you can come out in the first 25 minutes and say, we've got all four of them and we are coming at you and we're going to try and do a Liverpool of old. It's going to be 17-18 and let's try and stick two past them in the first 25. I understand the patience point down, but there's got to be a bit of them just looking at each other with grimaces like, how about we just roll all four of them out and let's have this. This could be really fun. They've got to at least be thinking about it.
Totally, yeah. I mean, but I think you can also make an argument with that potentially there's the possibility that he'll be thinking, right, considering we've just played Saturday, now we're playing Tuesday, whoever you put out there, give me 90 minutes of running in 60, and then you've got 5 subs as well. You then look on the hour to do maybe 3. that then says when Madrid are flagging, you go and sort of get another 3-0 in the last half an hour. He might look at it that way. I'm not sure. I mean, let's just go round and end with the one-word answer to the question. Dave, does Jota start?
Yes.
Joe?
Yeah.
Ollie?
Yep.
No. I'm going to say no. He doesn't. And I'm not going to explain myself anymore. But thank you very much to David Lynch, to Ollie Connelly, and to Joe Rabinowitz. That's been this week's Liverpool.com podcast. See you all soon.